Welcome to the Beyond the Horizons podcast, where we delve into and expand upon some of the key issues raised in the 2024 MSP Horizons report, produced in conjunction with Canalys. One of the core questions respondents were asked was to set out the biggest challenge their businesses faced. The top challenge came back resoundingly as new customer acquisition. In this episode, I'm talking to Enable Sales and Marketing head nerd Stefanie Hammond about how MSPs can set themselves up for sales success. So, Stefanie, thank you very much for joining me. Today, we're going to focus on your particular chosen subject, which is sales and marketing for MSPs. One of the things that came out of the MSP Horizons report is that 22% of those that responded ranked new customer acquisition as their biggest challenge. Is this something that you're familiar with and you see on a regular basis in your role as a sort of head sales and marketing nerd?
Absolutely. And interestingly enough, I just delivered my lead gen series of boot camps last week. And I delivered a peer cohort session during Empower in Frisco. And that slide has been kind of my starting slide for both of those different events. And so last week when I threw that slide up and said, look, we did this Horizons report, 22%, I rounded up and said, almost a quarter of MSPs still cite new customer acquisition as being their top business challenge. And I said, do you agree with that? And 50% of the people that attended my bootcamp series last week agreed with that. They said that new customer acquisition is something that they are struggling with within their MSP. So absolutely, I still see that.
It's nice to know that we're doing these reports and they're actually resonating with the MSP audience. So clearly we're getting, clearly we are kind of hitting the mark with that. So yeah. What do you kind of think or do you think there are any specific things that are really driving this, or is it just kind of, I suppose, slightly cultural and endemic within the fact that, people, they're going in as technical people and it's that, natural thing?
That's definitely, I think, one of the bigger contributors to that, Pete, is that when you look at MSPs, maybe it's changing a little bit nowadays, but I've been in the industry for 20 years. And for a large part of that time, MSPs were founded by techs, right? And techs know tech really, really well. They went to school for that, but they didn't go to school for business, sales, marketing. So I think a big part of it is because they were techs, they were founded by techs. And so when it comes to sales, they don't have the business acumen. They don't have that sales acumen, that marketing acumen that maybe someone who went to school for sales and business and marketing would have. And I also think another contributing factor is, if we're talking about owner-led sales, smaller MSPs, that business owner, there's a lot of hats that they're wearing, right? There's a lot of plates that they're trying to keep in the air. And there's a lot of priorities being thrown at them. And so sales and marketing is one of those things that it's done on probably a more ad hoc basis. I equate it to whack-a-mole. Like, they'll do a little bit of marketing and they'll be like, okay, I did some marketing. And then they go back down and they focus on something else of their business. And then it pops up, oh, I should do some marketing again. And so it's not given kind of the dedicated focus because there's too many things that are causing distractions. I also think because they are techs, MSPs founded by techs, when they do try and do the sales role, they come at it from a technical perspective, right? Like they're trying to sell a tool versus selling a package of services that has value. And this is really evident because one of the other questions I get asked a lot is, how do I price X? Insert tool here. How do I price EDR, like endpoint detection and response? How do I price MDR, managed detection and response? How do I price backup? How do I price Passportal? I'm just kind of throwing out Enable tool sets there, but insert tool. And when an MSP is asking me that, how do I price X, or what are other MSPs pricing for X? They're coming at it from a tools standpoint. And you're never going to sell a tool because again, think about who we're selling to. We're selling to non-technical business owners. So they don't care about the tool that you're using within your MSP. They care about how is it going to benefit them? How is their business going to be better? How are they going to make higher revenues, improve their costs, make them more competitive in the industry? And so again, kind of going back to MSPs founded by techs, they don't have the business acumen, they don't have the sales acumen, they're not able to connect with who they're trying to connect with, which is non-technical business owners. They're talking technical speak versus business speak, and making it relevant to them. So it's not, I don't think, one main issue. I think a couple issues. The other thing that I see a lot is, and again, it just kind of goes back to tech speak and kind of their background, is they're not doing a good enough job really differentiating themselves from their competitors, other MSPs down the street. When I look at websites and I'll see, hey, we are the premier managed service provider, MSP in the local area, and we deliver top quality managed services. Who cares? Right? Who cares? Again, think about who we're talking to. We're talking to non-technical business owners who, in their world, MSPs, we fix computers, right? If there's a problem with my computer, if I can't print, if I can't log onto my email, that's who I call. But MSPs, they do so much more than that, right? When you look at, MSPs, they're doing security services, compliance services, business continuity service, they're delivering training, consulting services. So there's a lot of other skill sets that MSPs have besides fixing printer issues. But when you look at their websites, you look at their marketing, you look at their sales, they don't talk about that. They talk about how they're an MSP. And those are industry terms. We understand what MSP means. We understand what managed services means. But again, thinking about who we're targeting, non-technical business owners, we need to use their love language. They don't understand what MSP means. But if they say, look, I'm really struggling, I live in a hurricane prone area, we get hurricanes. If someone comes at them and says, hey, we have a business continuity plan to keep your business up and running during hurricane season, that's relevant to me.
Yeah, it's going to resonate.
I'm probably going to pay more attention to you than somebody else is coming to me and say, hey, I do managed services. So again, I don't think it's one reason. Those are several reasons that I see.
And it's interesting because, so one thing that kind of comes to my mind as you're talking about that is, like, I know I spoke to, we did a podcast with Matt Takar recently talking about M&A stuff.
Yes.
And we were talking about there's a different type of person coming into the MSP into business these days because there are more business orientated people coming in.
I would agree with that.
But do you, from your experience, are you seeing this as a challenge across the board? So like small MSPs, big MSPs, or is it just kind of restricted, if you like, to the smaller sort of, I don't know, up to 5, maybe 10 people?
I wouldn't say that. I think smaller MSPs definitely do have that challenge because being smaller, they probably don't have the people, right? Like they don't have the dedicated sales resources. They don't have the dedicated marketing resources. But I think, some of the larger MSPs, they may have too many people. They could be too easily distracted, or not have a good go-to-market strategy defined. Because I do work with larger partners. I'm working with one right now, and they're like, Steph, our go-to-market strategy is very complex. We make the whole sales process for our salespeople very complex, and it's inhibiting our sales growth. So I don't think it's just smaller. I don't think it's just focused on the smaller. I think MSPs, if you are lacking the structure, the processes, the systems, and the people, they all play a role in helping to impede sales success.
Mm-hmm. So I suppose moving on to the kind of $6 million question or questions, what can MSPs do about that? And I mean, I know, so we've done, or sort of, I've pulled together sort of like a white paper, if you like, of some of your kind of recent blogs that touch on a lot of this stuff. So we'll link to that in the comments. But I suppose this is an opportunity really for us to look at some of the key things within that and some of the key areas that MSPs can do relatively easily to sort of really start to set themselves up for sales success and to get those new customers coming in?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, all the information, all the training that I try to provide, I want it to make it relevant, prescriptive, tactical, because I do want MSPs to be able to take what they hear, what we talk about, and be able to apply it to their business. But I think when it comes to sales, we can't get around the fact that you need someone dedicated to the growth function. Do we need a chief revenue officer and we are a 6 or a 10 person MSP shop? Who knows, right? But we do need someone whose whole task is growth and focused on growth and focused on revenue and generating revenue on a full-time basis. Not a business owner who, is working on everything else, and every once in a while we'll do some marketing, and every once in a while we'll go on an appointment, right? We need someone dedicated to that. So I don't think we can get around that. And one of the first questions I always seem to get asked by MSPs, if they are moving in that direction, they recognize, okay, I need to fix the sales motions by actually making a sales motion. They'll say, who do I hire? And they think they have to go and hire this very expensive account executive. They're like, I don't have the money to hire, kind of a top gun to come in and sell for me. And I think a lot of the times, especially if maybe they're a larger MSP in terms of their customers, I always say, well, who's looking after your existing customers now? And is there opportunity within your existing base? We don't always have to go and think huge and say, okay, new customer acquisition. Yes, that's what we're talking about today. But if we're talking about revenue growth for an MSP, there's a lot of revenue that probably can still be extracted from your existing clients. So, instead of going big, maybe we hire an account manager and make that account manager focused on treating your existing customers really, really well. We get an executive business review process going if you don't have that today. So you're meeting with them on a quarterly basis or every 6 months. You're finding opportunities. You're finding new MRR services you can tack on. You're finding new project work. So you're building the pipeline that way. But if you are treating your customers and you've put a diligent process in place around account management, then naturally, probably the referrals are going to increase, right? Because you're treating your existing customers so well. So that can kind of help fill the top part of the funnel with new leads. So an account manager won't be as expensive as a top gun salesperson. Or the other thing I'll say, who's booking your appointments for you? Like, because I think the business owner in the beginning should be the main salesperson. Like, you started the business, you may not have all the sales experience, the sales knowledge. You might be winging it, but you started the business. You understand the industry. You understand the need. So I think the MSP business owner should stay as the primary salesperson for now. Have your account manager and then have someone booking appointments for you so that you're not tasked with prospecting and doing the appointments. You have someone booking an appointment for you. And that's not a highly paid role either. But I think step one, we have to formulate a sales plan and who's going to actually do the roles.
Mm. And so that sounds a bit like kind of tackling the elephant in the room, which is really you've got to kind of like, you have to have somebody in position to do that. And that's not for a lot of business. And this isn't just restricted to MSPs.
No,
This
it's
is
for
a
it's
lot
for
of
anybody, right?
any
Yeah.
business that is growing. At
Yeah.
some point, you have to evaluate who to bring in, who to employ, and how that, whether the investment in that employing somebody else actually pays back.
Yeah. And actually, it was interesting because I was reading MSP Growth Hacks, Kevin Clune, and he actually put out a blog last week on this topic. And he surveyed just an informal LinkedIn survey and asked his followers, okay, if you had to start over again, who would you hire? Would you hire a salesperson, like a hunter, or would you hire an account manager or a farmer? And 64% of the MSPs responded back they would hire an account manager first if they had to start all over again. And I agree with that. Not only because my whole life at Enable has been account management. I started Enable as an account manager. They called us partner development specialists back then. I was the first one. And the whole reason they brought me in is they recognized we had our inside sales people that were booking appointments for the outside sales people, but they recognized that the outside sales people weren't account managers. They were focused on growing Enable. They were focused on finding us new partners, but they recognize we need a sales motion to care and maintain and grow the existing customer base we have. And now we have a whole partner success org 20 years later that has probably 200 people around it globally. So it's a really important function.
And you mentioned growth hacks there, MSP growth hacks. I mean, I know that one of the things that you've talked about a lot in the past is about this kind of concept of keeping yourself educated, reading constantly, developing yourself, and that plays into this, I'm sure, as well, doesn't it? Because you need to be developing your business knowledge, your business understanding, and taking guidance from outside.
Exactly, right? Like no one who is successful did it alone, right? They educated themselves. Peer groups, huge. The most successful MSPs that I have ever worked with or I've spoken with, they will all say that they are part of some peer group. And a lot of, an MSP dedicated peer group. And being part of a peer group is amazing because you're then able to tap into the experiences of people that have been there, done that, and have all the t-shirts, right? Especially if you are a newer MSP that's maybe coming into the market, or maybe you're now recognizing, I'm only a $1 million, $2 million MSP. I want to get to that 5. I want to get to that 10. So you do have growth aspirations. You need to continually educate yourself. And, I'm big fan of Paul Green. I listen to all his podcasts, the material that gets out there. I listen to, watch it, listen and read his newsletters, like especially those type of industry experts. Every MSP should be finding and cultivating their own list of podcast, newsletters, websites that they should be reading on a daily basis. Absolutely.
And you touched on peer groups there, which is something I was going to come to a little bit towards the end. So you've kind of thrown off my question.
Sorry.
But actually, it's a really good point to kind of like bring up, I suppose, at this juncture, which is that actually MSPs shouldn't be concerned. Whatever stage they're at, they're not alone, and there are other people out there that have been in exactly the same position and can actually share knowledge around this. And I was talking to the guys Hamish and Matt in Australia, and they were saying they brought a bunch of guys over to Empower in earlier in the year. And they created a WhatsApp group, and these guys were all in a WhatsApp group, and they'd never had that peer interaction before. But since they've gone back, that interaction's kept going. They've all been kind of going, oh, what do you think about this? Who's in it? I'm thinking of him looking at this bit of technology. Who's that? So, you raise that up a level and you talk about business challenges, and you talk about business growth. Having that peer group around you is hugely important.
And I don't think MSPs give it a lot of value to it. They think it's they think it's a waste of time, or maybe they're struggling. Maybe they're more of an introvert, and going out and introducing yourself to people that don't know you, like that can scare a lot of people. And, when I did the talking about Empower and I had my own sales cohort, that was the first question I asked. I had about 30 people in my cohort. And question number 1 was, okay, who's part of an MSP peer group? No one raised their hands. And I'm like, okay, you know what? Here's your first MSP peer group. There's 30 of you in here. And the rule, and it was the 3 days that they were with me, the rule I had for my peer group was when you come in for the next session, you're at a different table with different people. I don't want to see people with the same people. I don't want to see people at the back. So if you're at the back, you're at the front, because I wanted people to mix and mingle and get to know each other. And I think by the end of the 3 days, people left with those types of connections, which is phenomenal, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it is incredibly powerful. And it's and again, I was talking, this came out of the conversation, Matt and Hamish, that they were saying that, there were a couple of guys there who were a bit overwhelmed by the attention and the process, and so they've gone. They're still in the group, but they've gone back and they're setting up smaller events, Enable events down in Australia. And they're bringing those guys into that because they'll be able to interact in a more kind of closely knit, sort of
Yeah.
less kind of intimidating environment. So I mean, peer groups are not just
You
about big groups.
no,
It can be a little, as you say, can be a little bit
it can be a
intimidating
little
to
bit
some people.
intimidating, but I think at the end of the day, if you are focused on growth for your MSP, education, self education, reaching out and connecting with other MSPs in the industry is going to help you get there. And there are so many different events where you can easily meet other MSPs. Obviously, you talked about our Enable events that we hold globally. There's a lot of good channel events that MSPs attend, like Exchange is being one of them. Like just getting out there, it might be a little bit nerve wracking, but MSPs, this is such a phenomenal industry where people want to share. They're not afraid to tell you maybe what their secret sauce is. And I think for those MSPs that can kind of tap into that, they're the ones that are really they're doing very well.
No, that's really good, and I hear incredibly powerful stories about peer groups and that kind of
Yeah.
sharing all the time.
Yeah.
But just to kind of bring this back on track a little bit, so once once we've got to the position that you've hired, say you're in that position, you've made that hire, how do you go about then kind of like, or I suppose it's important then to start to sort of understand how to set goals effectively in terms of your where you want to go with your growth. How do we do that?
Yeah. So I think it's important, like you said, once you have your salespeople in play, we need to make them accountable for something, right? And I think before we can make them accountable for anything, we have to set expectations. We kind of have to set, we got to tell them, okay, what this is what you're going to do, and here's your activities. So, we need to make sure that we are putting in setting those expectations, putting in those milestones, setting their goals, in terms of activities. So if we've gone and hired maybe like an SDR, like a sales development representative. They're going to book appointments. That's their job. They're going to pick up the phone. They're going to call into companies. They're going to book appointments for you as the business owner. We have to set out what the expectations are for that in terms of, how many calls are you expected to make every day? How many appointments are you expected to book every week, every month? What are you doing to make sure that those appointments happen? That doesn't get canceled, doesn't get put off, postponed. So setting goals for each of those different individuals, like if you're doing account management, there's going to be expectations for that account manager, like how many executive business reviews are you doing each quarter? What's the MRR increase that you're hoping to generate out of your existing customers each quarter? What's the customer retention rate that you are expected to meet? So I think from an individual contributor perspective, it's going to be important to kind of set those expectations and set those milestones so that when you put people into those positions, they know what they have to do.
Hmm. And we again sort of like this again kind of pulling. I'm just kind of pulling out on some of the topics that we've talked about, or I say we've talked about, you've blogged about. So once we've got that sorted, there are certainly and we talk a lot about this concept of working on the business and not
Yeah.
in the business,
Yeah.
which includes that kind of element of everybody needs to keep learning.
Yeah.
And clearly that's hugely important, but then that sort of, and that leads you to sort of like, how can we then some of the tools and some of the ideas that we can look at in terms of how to generate leads.
Yeah. So working on the business really means that you might have to step away from it for a period of time, right? Like, setting goals, strategy, that's something that you can't do in between fires, right? Like you really need to remove yourself. MSPs I've talked to, they'll maybe just take a day if that's all they can get away from. They'll take 3 days, they'll take a week, but they'll remove themselves from the customers, from the busyness of the business, just to kind of step back and say, okay, this is where I want to see my business. Where is it today? Where do I want to take it? So I have a boot camp, and I blog about it, this whole concept of creating a roadmap for your MSP. And, the goal setting comes into that. So, a higher goal would have been, okay, I want to grow my business. What's impeding that? Well, I don't have anybody to actually do the sales. So that would be a priority that maybe we want to fit and we would add to our roadmap is, get some salespeople in play. But again, it's really kind of building that roadmap. And that's just really a 12-month plan of your top priorities that's going to help move the needle and get your business one step closer where you want it to be. But doing that, dealing with employee issues, customer issues, tech issues, you're never going to do it justice. You do need to remove yourself from the busyness and really spend that time and that dedicated focus on that.
And, so I suppose, again, one of the things that I like that I've heard you talk about, and I really enjoy, this is one of your blogs I really enjoyed. Not that I don't enjoy all your blogs, but this, you talk about a lot about how to close more deals, and I think that's kind of something that is, I think that's a really important thing that MSPs can understand when they're looking to get that new customer acquisition going.
Yeah, and closing more deals, you kind of want to work backwards, right? And so closing more deals, there's a lot that goes into that. And I think first and foremost is, are we attracting the right person? Are we targeting the right type of business? Because if we're not targeting the right type of customer who actually would want our services, we're never going to close that deal. There's a stat that I always use in my lead gen boot camps, and it was done. It was a survey done by SalesLab.com, and they interviewed, I think, 400 different salespeople, and they found that out of the 400 people that they surveyed, 50% of salespeople said that they're not engaged with businesses who are the good fit for the services that they sell. That is huge. As a salesperson, how can you spend 50% of your time interacting with businesses that you know will never subscribe to your services? It is a waste of time. It is a waste of effort. It's just a big waste all the way around. So closing more deals starts with making sure that we are targeting and attracting the right type of client. And so, we call that the ICP, right? Or TCP, target client profile, ideal client profile. I joked yesterday in my office hours that I think if I had $1 every time I use ICP in a day, I could probably retire by now, because I think I say the phrase better book of business and ideal client profile every day. I'm either writing it or talking about it. And I'm talking about it again today. It starts with making sure we're targeting the right type of individual, because not every business is going to be a good fit for your services. And I think the big struggle with MSPs, especially if they're feeling that anxiety that I need to sign on more customers, you don't need to pick up every nickel that you find. There's value in being selective in who you targeting and being intentional around who you want to bring into the business. And so kind of going back to the goal setting, going back to the roadmap planning, another thing that MSPs really need to focus on if they haven't done this type of exercise before is, who is my target client? Who do I want to do business with? And I talk about that in my blogs. I talk about that in my boot camps. And usually the first, because MSPs are like, oh my God, that seems like really overwhelming. Like, who do I want to have as a client? But it doesn't have to be. It just comes to thinking about, well, look at your clients today. Who are your favorite ones? Why are they your favorite ones? They're probably your favorite ones because they pay you on time. They're probably your favorite ones because they listen to you. If you bring a recommendation their way, they're not second guessing you. They're saying, "Oh, okay, that makes sense. All right, let's put a plan in place to make that happen." So they're respectful of you, of your recommendations. They understand that you have their best business goals at heart, and it's a partnership. And so then we just kind of peel that back a little bit and say, okay, well, what verticals are they in, right? Like maybe there's some verticals, some industries that you support really, really well. Can we go deeper into those verticals, right? Is there a certain size customer that you enjoy working with? Do you enjoy kind of taking care of everything? That traditional outsourced type of engagement where you as the MSP are looking after 100% of their network, or do you enjoy working with larger organizations like mid or upper enterprise where there's internal IT people there, and you like being a partner with that IT person, whether it's a CTO or a director IT or a VP of technology, because those are two totally different sales conversations, two totally different sales messagings and sales processes. So that's a big thing that you kind of need to figure out for yourself as well. But again, really thinking about who do I want to do business with, that's going to help increase your close rates. Other things that are going to help increase your close rates is just kind of having that structured process on how you can move that prospect through the sales funnel so they become a closed signed deal at the end. It starts with having a good discovery process. And what do I mean by that? I mean making sure that you're asking the right types of questions to your prospect so that you're finding out everything you can about their business. And I think one of the struggles, especially with, MSPs that don't have a sales background, is they feel this need to do all the talking, right? They feel that, they're uncomfortable with silence. And because they're not great in sales, not that they mean to be narcissists, but they talk a lot about themselves and their MSP, and that's not how a good discovery process goes. Like, you want to sit back and you want to let your prospect talk. If you want to have a good, solid, successful sales process, you need to do less talking and the prospect has to do more talking. And so having kind of that structure around the types of questions to ask, how do you keep the conversation flowing? How do you get the details that you need out of the prospect to help build your case? Because that's really what you're doing here, right? You're closing your sale because you've built a good business case. You have built a case where whoever they're using today, for whatever reason, isn't cutting it, because most businesses have an MSP today. So the challenge isn't how do I go and find new businesses for my MSP. The challenge is really how do I steal business from another MSP, right? And it's how do you make yourself stand out? How do you make yourself appear more professional, more knowledgeable, have a greater authority in a certain topic. Those are all things that you need to sort to help build your case, that when you get to the end of the sales process, you have demonstrated that, oh wow, this MSP does things very differently. They support their customers very differently than what I'm experiencing today. I think I'm going to give them a shot. I think I'm going to give them a try. Yeah. So it kind of, like, if you want to close more business, you got to really kind of examine what are you doing at the very outset, to make sure that you're getting the quality clients that you want for your MSP.
Mm. And you've just reminded me actually of another piece that you wrote that I found kind of really obvious, but actually quite groundbreaking in a way, and that's that concept of listening. To be a good salesperson, you need to be listening.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of people forget that because it's like you're trying to sell.
Yeah.
But part of selling is actually listening, because then you can understand what the person's problems are or their challenges are, and then you can address those challenges.
Yeah, exactly. And it does seem so basic, but I was not a born salesperson. I still say I'm not a born salesperson. And it's ironic that I'm the head sales and marketing nerd, because I'm not a salesperson. And, like, again, when I started at Enable, I was account management, right? So we had very talented salespeople who did the hard part. They did the cold calling. They got MSPs interested. The outside sales execs, they closed them, and then they got moved over into my territory. So that's not sales, right? I didn't do anything there to get them here. But I was very good, and I still feel that I am. I'm a very good account manager. And so I remember in 2011, I went away on vacation. It was the summertime, and I was saying goodbye to my boss. I said, "See you in a week." And he goes, "Oh, by the way, when you come back, you're going to have targets and you're going to be a salesperson. So enjoy your vacation. But when you get back, your role's completely changing." And I remember saying to my boss, I'm like, "I'm not a salesperson." And he goes, "Honey, you are now." And
that would have been my worst nightmare.
But it's not in my personality to fail. So I did a lot of reading, a lot of educating, and I also had a fantastic manager at the time. And he's now VPs. He still was Enable. He's now a VP of sales now, but he was my manager at the time. And I was coming to him saying, "I don't know anything about sales." Like, ugh. And he goes, "Listen, that's all you need to do is ask some pointed questions, get them talking. And if you can get them talking and you don't talk and you don't respond back, not thinking, okay, what am I going to say next? You will be amazed at what gets communicated to you. And then just take your notes and then use it to build your case. And that little piece of advice continues to serve me today. Even when I'm having any conversation, trying to be in the moment, ask a pointed question like, oh, okay, can you help me understand that a little bit more? I'm not, please provide a little bit more clarification. What do you mean by that? And then stop talking and the information will flow.
Yeah, as I say, it's a powerful thing to kind of get your head around, and I suppose to just to kind of wrap this up, and this will be the first of many, in terms of podcasts with you, because I think
I passed.
But I mean, just in terms of that, I think it's the idea of having an ongoing kind of sales motion within the podcast we do, I think it's really important. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening to this, we will be doing more. But just to wrap up this particular one, let's just briefly kind of touch on that subject of the fact, and it boils down to the old adage of like, if you can't measure it or you can't track it, don't do it. How does that map onto the sales process, and what are the kind of things that you need to be focused on tracking to keep that sales performance and that sales motion running?
Yeah. So one of the biggest, there's so many KPIs that you can track, and if you've never done this before, it can be a little nerve wracking because you also don't want to track for the sake of tracking, and you don't want to get buried in the minutia of tracking. So one of the key metrics that I do encourage MSPs to really pay attention to is this concept of burn rate. And, the late Mike Cullen talked about that all the time with MSPs. And if you haven't heard of the burn rate, basically what you're doing is you want to take all of your recurring revenue, or you want to ensure that all of the recurring revenue that you're generating from your managed services business is covering all of your operating expenses, your owner's compensation, overhead. Because as soon as your recurring revenue is covering all of those expenses, then any hardware sales that you do, any project work that you do, it gets to go right to the bottom line. You get to invest that back in your business. But if your recurring revenue that you're generating from your managed services business isn't sufficient to cover all of your operating expenses and your overhead, then you're not going to have that cash flow to build back into your business. And you're going to have to rely on the project work and the lower margin hardware sales to try and recoup that loss. And so the goal with the burn rate is you want to be above one, meaning that you have, your recurring revenue is more than sufficient of covering all of your expenses. If you happen to be below one, what I love about this is that there's a lot of levers that you can then choose from to try and get it above one. Obviously, the big one is we got to generate more MRR, right? If we can bring in more MRR to cover our expenses, that's gonna help move the needle and get us above one. And so, it's looking at from a sales perspective. Well, what do I need to do to generate more MRR? Yes, we can sign on more customers, right? That's kind of what we're talking about today. But kind of going back what I said earlier is, what can we do to generate more MRR from our existing clients? So what sales motion could we put in account for that? We bring in the account manager. We bring in the executive business reviews. We have those conversations. Looking at our programs. What kind of programs are we bringing to market? Are we selling bespoke programs? Are we selling a la carte, like maybe just an EDR here and a backup there? You know, Really, we should be selling a bundled package of services and selling that bundled package of services to all of our clients. So if you have this standardized package, but you have clients that aren't on it, well, there's some MRR growth immediate right there just by upgrading and moving those clients into that standardized package. Are we raising prices? If we put in a regular cadence for raising prices, we're going to generate more MRR. So it seems like such a simple concept, but yeah, if we can build in our price increases every year, we're going to generate more MRR for our organization. And what I also say is if you are selling package services, every time you send out a new proposal, nudge it up a bit. Your pricing shouldn't remain static. So if you're sending out a new proposal to a new customer and you were getting maybe 50% gross margin on the last contract, 51% this time, 52. Just keep nudging it up a little bit to see what the market is going to bear. Because if you can get someone to sign at 52, 53, 55, 70% margin, then you know what the market is going to bear. And maybe you're underpricing your services. So you should always be looking at nudging your pricing up for every new contract that you're coming into. So that's like from the MRR perspective. But we also need to look at the profitability side as well. Like if our labor costs are expensive, we're doing a lot of things manually and we can improve that through automation, that's also going to move the needle on our burn rate and get us close. Because if we can reduce our prices or reduce our costs, but increase our MRR, we're going to get closer to one. And so, I know one of the things that the guys, the technical nerds talk about a lot is automation and operational efficiency. Like if you're doing a task 3 times or more, that has to be automated. That's money that you are giving away because you're allowing people to do that work and not the tool sets. And we should never be scaling with people. We should be trying to scale with tool sets. And so that's usually kind of that first metric that I really encourage MSPs to track is what is your burn rate? Because then you'll be able to figure out, okay, well, do I need to raise MRR? What are my tasks that I need to do to increase my MRR? Do I need to focus on my costs and my profitability? Okay, well, then let's focus on what I'm doing from an automation or tool set standardization. That gets added onto your roadmap. That becomes a priority. That becomes a rock that you then focus on. So it helps you with your business planning. It helps you with your goal planning. So it's a metric that I really, really like. And there's a lot of different levers that you can really dig into to see, okay, well, what can I do realistically to always move that needle in a positive growth direction?
Excellent. So let's leave it there for now. As ever, thank you for your time. And just for the people that are listening, if you're not already taking advantage of Stefanie's boot camps or reading her blogs, you really need to do yourself a favor and get in there and get involved in those. And I'll put links to that and sort of at the bottom of these so people can kind of check them out. But yeah, no, Stefanie, as I said, we'll do more of these because
Wonderful.
I think there is just so much more to dive into. But yeah, thank you for your time and
thank you
looking
for
forward to the
having
next
me.
one. And
Thanks,
actually,
Pete.
I would say what's been really interesting for me is I've always been somebody that doesn't like sales, and reading your stuff is actually starting to make me kind of grudgingly learn to love sales a little bit.
You're grudgingly learning to like sales, and I'm grudgingly starting to say I'm a salesperson. So maybe we'll meet in the middle somewhere.
All right, great stuff. Thank you very much for your
problem.
time.
Thanks,
We'll see you
Pete.
soon. Take care.
Bye.